In April of 2023, 20-year-old Kaylin Gillis was riding with friends through rural upstate New York when their GPS led them into the wrong driveway. Realizing their mistake, they immediately began turning around to leave, but homeowner Kevin Monahan quickly emerged with a shotgun. Without a word, he fired 2 blasts into the vehicle as it rolled away, one round striking Kaylin in the neck. Her friends frantically drove miles searching for cell service, but by the time they reached any help, she was dead. At trial, prosecutors described how Monahan showed no remorse, even claiming he had done nothing wrong. The next year, a jury convicted him of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 25 years to life, leaving Kaylin's family haunted by the fact that a single wrong turn ended in their daughter's execution-style death. In March of 2023, Peruvian police discovered an 800-year-old mummy hidden in a food delivery bag. Its keeper, 26-year-old Julio Cesar Bermejo, claimed the remains were his spiritual girlfriend named Juanita and that she'd been in his family for generations. But experts revealed the preserved body was actually a man who died around age 45. The mummy was seized by Peru's Ministry of Culture for protection, while Bermejo was detained as authorities investigated how he came to treat a centuries-old corpse as his lover. In 2012, 18-year-old Gabby Scanlon was celebrating her birthday at Oscar's Wine Bar in Lancaster, England, when staff served her a cocktail topped with liquid nitrogen. Moments after downing the smoking drink, she felt a violent pain in her abdomen. Doctors later said it was as if her stomach had exploded from the freezing chemical. She was rushed into emergency surgery, where doctors had to remove her entire stomach and reroute her digestive tract just to save her life. 3 years later, in 2015, the bar was fined £100,000 for failing to recognize the danger of serving cocktails still bubbling with liquid nitrogen. Kansas City pharmacist Robert Ray Courtney illegally diluted thousands of medications, including chemotherapy, over nearly a decade, claiming extra profit. Estimates put the number of affected patients at about 4,200, with some treatments watered down to as low as 17% of the prescribed dose. Convicted in 2002 and sentenced to 30 years, he was released to home confinement in 2024 under the First Step Act, sparking outrage from victims who think his actions contributed to serious harm and deaths. In the early 1930s, New York high society had an unlikely new it girl, a mannequin named Cynthia. Designed by artist Lester Gaba, she was so lifelike that designers dressed her in couture. She was photographed at parties and even received fan mail like a real celebrity. For years, people treated her like she was actually alive. But in 1938, Cynthia toppled from a chair and shattered into pieces, and newspapers reported her death with obituaries, as though a beloved socialite had just passed away. In the early 1980s, Minneapolis was haunted by the weepy-voiced killer, a man who routinely phoned police after his murders, sobbing and begging them to stop him. For years, his trembling voice was the only lead. That changed in 1982 when he lured sex worker Denise Williams into his car and stabbed her 15 times with a screwdriver. But Williams fought back, smashing a glass bottle over his head and escaping. Bleeding and panicked, he later called 911 for medical help, and detectives immediately recognized the same weepy voice from the anonymous murder call. He was identified as Paul Michael Stefani and sentenced to life. A North Carolina man was sentenced to nearly a decade in prison after one of the most disturbing neglect cases in recent history. For 6 to 8 months, 66-year-old Bonnie Kornhaber, who was bound to a wheelchair, lay helplessly on the floor of her cluttered, hoarded home after falling from her chair. Her husband Louis admitted he never called for help because he was embarrassed about the conditions inside, leaving her to waste away surrounded by spoiled food, trash, and insects. When Bonnie finally told him she couldn't breathe, he ignored her pleas and watched TV in another room until she was dead. By the time first responders arrived, her body was covered in sores and filth, and Lewis was later convicted of second-degree murder and neglect, sealing his downfall after nearly 40 years of marriage. An unconfirmed popular urban legend from the 90s states that Marilyn Manson had some of his ribs removed so that he could perform autofellatio. The rumor became so widespread that he had to publicly deny it, saying, "If I really had my ribs removed, I would have been in Playgirl by now." Despite his denial, the rumor still persists to this day. During the Victorian era, masturbation was considered a form of self-abuse that caused a range of physical and mental illnesses from blindness to insanity. To combat this panic, at least 35 anti-masturbation devices were patented to prevent people from touching themselves, including the Jugum penis, a steel ring lined with teeth that jabbed its wearer at the onset of an erection, thereby using pain to train the wearer not to get aroused. England's press erupted in 1726 when a peasant woman named Mary Toff claimed to have given birth to rabbits. Surgeons reportedly delivered several dead litters from her, sparking a media frenzy and fascination from the medical community. Eventually, Toft had no choice but to confess it was a total hoax. She'd been collecting the rabbits and killing them before shoving them up her sniz. The scandal humiliated London's medical elite and ruined the careers of several prominent surgeons as Mary was imprisoned for fraud. In 1999, 23-year-old Fan Man Yi of Hong Kong was kidnapped by a loan shark and two accomplices after stealing a small sum of money. For over a month, she was held captive in a Sim Sha Sui apartment, where she was beaten with metal bars, burned with melted plastic, forced to smile through torture, and subjected to humiliating commands until she finally died from her injuries. Her killers then dismembered her body, boiling the remains, and sewing her skull into a large Hello Kitty mermaid doll. The crime only came to light when a teenage accomplice confessed, claiming she was being haunted by Fan's ghost, leading police to one of the most horrifying discoveries in Hong Kong's history. Here are some pranks that went so far they got people killed. In 2021, YouTube prankster Timothy Wilkes had approached a group of strangers in a Nashville parking lot while carrying a butcher knife. He was apparently staging a fake robbery to see how people would react, but was almost immediately shot and killed by David Starnes Jr., who said he was unaware that he was being pranked and fired in self-defense. No one was charged. In 2012, Montana man Randy Lee Tenley was trying to spark reported sightings of Bigfoot by dressing up in a ghillie suit and standing in the middle of a highway. He tragically ended up being struck by two different cars and was pronounced dead at the scene. In 1996, the captain and flight engineer of a Colombian cargo flight decided to prank their novice first officer by giving him control of the plane after shutting off two engines. The plane stalled immediately after takeoff and crashed into a neighborhood, killing 22 people, including several children who were playing soccer on the ground. When Greg Gingrich took his daughter to the Grand Canyon in 1992, he thought it would be hilarious to pretend that he was falling. So he climbed over the barrier and windmilled his arms before losing his footing, causing him to actually plummet 400 feet to his death while his young daughter watched in horror. Known for his sense of humor, Italian pro soccer player Luciano Riccone took one joke just a little too far in 1977. He decided to fake a robbery at his friend's jewelry shop in Rome, unaware of the fact that the shop was actually robbed just 2 weeks prior and the owner was still paranoid. Luciano ran into the store yelling, "Stop, this is a robbery," while covering his face. Unfortunately, his friend acted quickly and shot Riccone directly in the chest with a shotgun. And the man's final words were, "It's just a joke." She endured abortion after abortion until her body could no longer take it. In 2017, a woman in eastern China reportedly died after undergoing 4 abortions in a single year, each one carried out under pressure from her husband, who was determined to have a son. When every pregnancy resulted in a girl, he insisted she terminate, ignoring the strain it put on her health. After the 4th procedure, her body gave out and she succumbed to the damage. A grim reminder of how cultural obsession with male heirs can turn deadly. In 2003, wrestling legend The Iron Sheik sat in a courtroom watching the man who had murdered his beloved daughter, Marissa. Hidden inside his mouth was a razor blade. His plan was to leap across the aisle and slit the killer's throat in front of a packed courtroom. But at the last moment, his family physically surrounded him, begging him not to throw his own life away, and he broke down in their arms. The killer was sentenced to life in prison, and in the years afterward, Sheik put down the drugs and worked hard to rebuild his life as a tribute to his daughter. On his grave in Stratford-upon-Avon, William Shakespeare left a chilling warning: "Blessed be the man who spares these stones, and cursed be he that moves my bones." Yet in 2016, ground-penetrating radar revealed a disturbing truth. The head of his grave showed signs of tampering, with a mysterious brick repair where his skull should be. The discovery gave new credence to a long-dismissed urban legend that grave robbers stole Shakespeare's skull in the late 1700s. 71-year-old George Hodgson Zinn became an unsettling side character in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination. As Kirk lay bleeding on stage, Zinn, a well-known Utah political agitator with a history of disruptive antics, told bystanders and police that he was the shooter. Officers quickly detained him, sparking confusion as viral footage showed the elderly man being hauled away in cuffs. But Zinn clearly didn't fit the profile. Within hours, investigators announced that he had no connection to the rooftop sniper. Instead, he was charged only with obstruction, echoing a bizarre past that included a 2013 arrest for allegedly emailing a bomb threat joke to the Salt Lake City Marathon. On September 10, 2025, conservative activist Charlie Kirk was gunned down while speaking at Utah Valley University, the fatal shot tearing through his neck from nearly 200 yards away. Police say the assassin was 22-year-old Tyler Robinson, a Utah man whose own father recognized him in surveillance photos and turned him in. Investigators found he had crept onto the roof of the Losi Center with a bolt-action rifle fitted with a scope, leaving behind eerie forensic traces like palm marks, boot prints, and imprints where his arm braced the gun. Even more disturbing were the shell casings scattered at the scene, one taunting, "Hey fascists, catch," while others were engraved with bizarre memes. Robinson also allegedly talked about retrieving a rifle from a bush, wrapping it in a towel, and engraving bullets in online Discord messages. Kirk collapsed on stage in front of a crowd of panicked students, bleeding out as security dragged him away. He died en route to the hospital, while Robinson was captured the next day and now faces multiple felony charges, including aggravated murder and what authorities are calling a targeted political assassination. But key questions still remain: how long Robinson planned the shooting, exactly how he obtained the rifle, and whether anyone else knew of his intentions beyond cryptic online posts. Officials say he acted alone, yet his mix of political slogans, meme-like engravings, and anti-fascist references leave investigators and the public still searching for a clear motive beyond his political anger toward Charlie Kirk. During McLovin's sex scene in Superbad, actor Christopher Mintz-Plasse had to have his mother present while filming due to legal requirements. The actor was only 17 years old at the time of filming, and California law mandates that a parent or guardian must be on set when a minor is involved in scenes of sexual nature. The U.S. Navy once banned tattoos it considered obscene, leading to a boom of tattoos of nude women on men who didn't want to serve. If they decided to serve later on, they had to have a tattoo artist dress the woman to meet Navy requirements. In 1999, Disney had to recall 3.4 million copies of the children's film The Rescuers because one of the animators inserted a picture of a nude woman into 2 frames of the movie. During the Apollo missions, NASA provided male astronauts with condom-like urination devices available in small, medium, and large sizes. However, due to apparent concerns about personal image, many astronauts opted for the largest size, leading to improper fits and urine leakage. To address this, NASA engineers humorously relabeled the sizes as large, gigantic, and humongous to encourage astronauts to choose the appropriate size. After Drew Barrymore posed nude for a 1995 issue of Playboy at age 19, her godfather Steven Spielberg had a response for her. For Drew's 20th birthday, he sent her a quilt with the words "Cover Up" stitched on it. He also included a copy of the magazine with her photos altered by his art department to make her appear fully clothed. In 1828, American artist Sarah Goodridge painted a miniature portrait of her own breasts and sent it to a man she liked. It's considered by historians to be one of the earliest cases of someone sending nudes. After Rasputin's dramatic murder in 1916, it was rumored that his beef bayonet had been severed, preserved, and worshipped by a group of female devotees who claimed it could cure infertility with a single touch. Decades later, a Russian museum began displaying a preserved phallic object in a jar, claiming it was Rasputin's 11-inch Manneconda. The item became famous, but many experts dismissed it as a hoax, most likely a sea cucumber or animal organ. The item is still on display at a sex museum in St. Petersburg, Russia. Italian adult film star Cheerleader became famous in 1978 for being the first woman to show her breasts on live Italian television, after which she ran for office while promising voters she'd legalize sex in public and bring an end to nuclear power. She was elected in 1987 and once notably offered to sleep with Saddam Hussein if he agreed to peace talks. She was known to deliver speeches with one breast exposed and incorporate erotic performances into her campaigns. Basketball legend Wilt Chamberlain once claimed that he slept with over 20,000 women, averaging 1.4 women per day for over 40 years. He also admitted that he preferred group sex because he found it far more efficient. While many have questioned the accuracy or practicality of the claim, Wilt stood by it until the day he died, not to brag but to illustrate the emptiness of such a lifestyle, later stating that he would have felt far more fulfilled by deeply loving just one woman. In October of 2003, a Las Vegas audience watched in horror as Roy Horn of the famed duo Siegfried and Roy was mauled on stage by his own 600-pound white tiger, Manticore. What began as a dazzling birthday performance suddenly turned grim when the animal clamped its jaws around Roy's neck and dragged him off stage, crushing his windpipe and leaving him moments from death. He miraculously survived, but the attack left him partially paralyzed, ending the duo's legendary Vegas run after more than a decade at the Mirage. Roy later claimed he had felt faint during the act and that the tiger was simply trying to protect him, but many believe it was a brutal reminder that even a lifetime of training can't tame a predator's instincts. Singer and model Taylor Moll lives with one of the rarest genetic conditions on Earth, chimerism. While still in the womb, she absorbed her fraternal twin, and today her body carries two sets of DNA, her own and that of her lost sibling. The most striking evidence runs straight down her torso, where a sharp line divides two different skin tones, one coded by her DNA, the other by her twins. Doctors say she effectively lives with two immune systems, making her more prone to health insensitivities and turning her body into a living reminder of the sibling who never survived. He didn't want to die alone, so in 2003, 56-year-old Kim Dae-han did the unthinkable. After suffering a stroke and sinking into despair, he carried containers of flammable liquid onto a crowded South Korean subway train and lit them on fire. Within minutes, the underground station was an inferno, one train engulfed in flames, another trapped behind sealed doors as the smoke choked hundreds of passengers. By the time rescuers gained control, 192 passengers were dead, and hundreds more were injured in South Korea's worst disaster in peacetime history. Kim, badly burned but alive, ended up fleeing the scene, only to be captured, sentenced to life, and die alone in prison the following year. In November of 2021, 23-year-old Tina Tintor was driving home in Las Vegas after taking her golden retriever Max out for a late-night walk when her car was suddenly struck at more than 150 miles per hour by NFL wide receiver Henry Ruggs III, who was heavily intoxicated. The impact sent her Toyota RAV4 up in flames, trapping both Tina and Max inside as bystanders desperately tried but failed to pull them out. Both were killed in the blaze, and Ruggs, who had a BAC more than twice the legal limit, was later sentenced to prison for DUI, resulting in death. In September of 2025, 21-year-old University of Kentucky cheerleader Laken Snelling was arrested after her roommate called 911 to report finding a dead newborn in their off-campus home. The baby boy was found wrapped in a towel and shoved into a black garbage bag in the back of a closet. When first responders arrived, the baby was described as cold to the touch, suggesting he had been there for hours. Police later learned Snelling had secretly carried the pregnancy to term, delivered the baby in silence, and left him hidden before leaving the house. She was later taken into custody and charged with abuse of a corpse, tampering with evidence, and concealing the birth of an infant. Since her arrest, Snelling has withdrawn from the university and is no longer listed on the school's cheer team. If convicted, the felony charges alone carry up to 5 years in prison and thousands in fines. She was released on a $100,000 bond and is currently under house arrest with her parents in Tennessee as investigators continue to determine the baby's cause of death. These are some of the most disturbing things that were found in the rubble of the Twin Towers. In the wreckage, workers found a fragment of a Bible literally fused to a slab of steel by the fire and pressure. Eerily, it was open to the verse, "An eye for an eye, but I say to you, resist not evil." Amid the ash and twisted metal, investigators recovered a hijacker's passport lying intact on the sidewalk near the burning towers. It belonged to Satam al-Sukami of Flight 11 and was handed to police by a passerby just minutes before the South Tower collapsed. The fragile document's survival amid destruction has fueled many conspiracy theories, though experts claim that light objects can be blown clear by the force of a crash. Known as the meteor, this was the result of 5 floors of the World Trade Center being compressed together after the buildings collapsed. It's not known if there are any human remains inside. Rescue crews uncovered 2 massive steel beams fused together in the shape of a cross. The so-called Ground Zero Cross became a powerful religious symbol preserved today at the 9/11 Memorial. Long after the cleanup, body parts were still being uncovered. In 2006, the arm of a victim was found on the rooftop of a nearby bank, and as recently as 2013, fragments of human remains were discovered on a Manhattan rooftop over a decade after the attacks. Beneath the rubble, archaeologists found the remains of an 18th century wooden ship, preserved under the World Trade Center site for centuries until the tower's collapse exposed it. Out of the 40,000 windows within the Twin Towers, only one of them survived 9/11. It's believed to have come from the 82nd floor of the South Tower, one of the 9 floors that was struck by the second plane. Amid the darkest day in modern history, these are the miracles of 9/11 that still leave people speechless. After nearly 27 hours buried under debris, Janelle Guzman McMillan, an office worker in the North Tower, was the last person rescued alive from Ground Zero. Pinned under concrete with only a single hand free, she said she felt someone holding it and telling her that she would be okay. When rescuers finally pulled her out, they all swore that none of them had touched her hand. In the North Tower's Stairwell B, a group of 16 firefighters, a police officer, and a civilian survived the entire collapse, entombed in a concrete pocket while everything around them was pulverized. They were dug out hours later still alive in what rescuers called a miracle. One survivor, Stanley Premnath, was literally looking at the nose of Flight 175 as it struck the South Tower. His office was completely shredded, but he survived by diving under his desk. He was later pulled from the rubble by another worker, both escaping down the stairwell before the building collapsed. A Port Authority worker named Pasquale Buzelli was on the 22nd floor of the North Tower when it suddenly collapsed beneath him. But instead of being crushed, he was carried down with the debris, riding it like a wave. He woke up hours later on top of a pile of rubble with only a broken ankle, later nicknamed the 9/11 Surfer. A guide dog named Roselle led a group of people, including her blind owner, down 78 flights of stairs before the North Tower collapsed. She stopped only once to give kisses to a woman who was having a panic attack. In 2007, NASA astronaut Lisa Nowak made headlines for one of the strangest scandals in space history. Obsessed with her ex-boyfriend's new partner, Lisa drove 900 miles from Houston to Orlando in a single stretch, allegedly wearing adult diapers so she wouldn't have to stop for the bathroom. In her car, police found a BB gun, a knife, pepper spray, rubber tubing, and trash bags, tools suggesting a plan to kidnap. She ambushed Colleen Shipman in an airport parking lot, spraying her with mace before being arrested. Once a respected astronaut who had flown on the Space Shuttle Discovery, Nowak became infamous as the first NASA astronaut ever fired after the bizarre meltdown. In 2009, she managed to avoid jail time, receiving a year of probation and community service. This disturbing sign was recently put up at a cemetery in Tampa Bay. In January of 2004, Texas math teacher Alejandro Navarro checked into the ER with serious heart and kidney problems, knowing he might not make it out. But instead of resting, he pulled out his laptop and started grading papers, determined to finish his students' work even as doctors prepared him for critical care. The next day, Navarro tragically passed away, and the photo his daughter shared of him bent over his computer in the hospital went viral. This has to be the strangest disorder I've ever heard of by far. Body integrity identity disorder is a rare neurological condition that causes the patient to believe that one or more of their limbs does not belong to them. This sense of disconnection often begins in early childhood, with sufferers reporting an intense and persistent desire to remove or disable the offending limb. Some patients become so distressed that they attempt self-amputation, using power tools, shotguns, or dry ice to damage the limb beyond repair. Renowned cricket historian Roland Bowen famously severed his own leg in 1968 while suffering from this disorder, and in the late 90s, Scottish surgeon Robert Smith controversially performed amputations on healthy patients who begged him to cut off one of their limbs. In many of these cases, patients report an indescribable sense of relief and psychological alignment following the removal of the unwanted limb. For them, the amputation is not a loss, but a long-sought correction in the harmony between their physical form and internal identity. This man accidentally entered the real-life backrooms and was found dead 3 weeks later. In January of 2017, 71-year-old Bernard Gore was supposed to meet his wife and daughter at a Westfield mall in Sydney, Australia, but never showed up. He'd apparently been doing some shopping on his own before they showed up, then completely disappeared without a trace. After frantically searching for her husband who suffered from dementia, Angela Gore filed a missing persons report with local authorities. Bernard was last seen by a store clerk who said the man looked confused on the morning of his disappearance. Investigators were initially hopeful when surveillance footage showed Bernard walking towards a fire escape, but they didn't realize that through the exit was a complete labyrinth of stairwells, confusing hallways, and self-locking doors. In fact, the entire fire escape stretches for 8 miles, and numerous mall shoppers have been lost down there before, with one woman describing it as a maze from a nightmare. Accordingly, it took police 3 weeks to finally locate Bernard's lifeless body in the stairwell. He was likely wandering around the fire escape for up to an entire week before eventually succumbing to natural causes. Bernard's death was officially ruled the result of a misadventure. In 2015, Denise Huskins was kidnapped from her boyfriend's California home by a masked intruder before being held for ransom. She was taken to a remote location where she was blindfolded, drugged, and raped multiple times over the next 2 days. When Denise was suddenly released, police accused her of faking the entire story like a scene straight out of Gone Girl. They mocked her during press conferences and labeled her as mentally unstable, until evidence finally surfaced proving that everything she'd said was true. Her kidnapper turned out to be a former Harvard-educated lawyer who had a history of stalking couples. This still frame is from the Collateral murder video released by WikiLeaks, captured moments before U.S. Apache helicopter pilots opened fire on local civilians and journalists in Baghdad 2007. The footage, which includes audio of the pilots making casual jokes during the attack, was leaked by whistleblower Chelsea Manning, who was subsequently sentenced to 35 years in prison, though this sentence was later commuted. No charges were ever filed against the military personnel involved in the incident. After retiring from the NFL in 1990, Hall of Famer Mike Webster's life unraveled into a spiral of bizarre and disturbing behavior. Once celebrated as the Iron Man of the Pittsburgh Steelers, he spent his final years homeless or sleeping in his pickup truck, suffering crushing headaches, dementia, and paranoia. Friends and family later described shocking habits: urinating in his own oven, shocking himself with a taser just to fall asleep, and gluing his decaying teeth back together. At one point, he even carried around a briefcase filled with superglue, painkillers, and duct tape, using them as makeshift tools to hold his broken body together. By the time he died of a heart attack in 2002 at just 50 years old, Webster's decline had become a cautionary tale of the hidden costs of football. When doctors examined his brain, they discovered the first confirmed case of CTE in an NFL player, proof of how the game had slowly destroyed him from the inside out. Here are some morbid facts about the Pope. Popes can't be organ donors because their body becomes property of the church once they die. This rule invalidated Pope Benedict's organ donor card, which he had held since the 1970s. This practice ensures the preservation of the body for potential future veneration, especially if the Pope is canonized as a saint. It's been long rumored that when a Pope dies, it's tradition to hit him on the head with a silver hammer to ensure that he's actually dead and not just sleeping. In 897, Pope Stephen VI had his dead predecessor Pope Formosus dug up, dressed in papal robes, and put on trial. They propped his corpse on a throne, screamed at it, found him guilty, severed 3 of his fingers, and threw his body in the river. The public was so horrified by the grotesque trial that Stephen VI was soon imprisoned and strangled to death. When Pope Pius XII died, his embalming was so poorly botched that his body began to rot and blow almost immediately. During the public viewing, his nose fell off, and his body reportedly exploded from gas buildup inside of the casket due to blistering heat. In 1981, a Turkish man shot Pope John Paul II 4 times but didn't kill him. After the Pope recovered, he visited the assassin in prison and gave him his forgiveness. The assassin was soon pardoned at the Pope's request, and 33 years after his crime, he visited the Vatican and laid flowers on the Pope's tomb. With the tragic passing of Pope Francis, let's take a look at some of the popes throughout history who died in much crazier ways. For 300 years, the office of the Pope was almost certainly a death sentence. It's said that 28 out of the first 31 popes were murdered, many in violent ways. For example, ancient Roman authorities executed Saint Clement I by attaching an anchor to his neck and dropping him into the Black Sea. He would eventually become the patron saint of mariners. Tradition holds that an angry mob killed Pope Saint Calixtus by throwing him down a well. The well is still preserved at the Church of Santa Maria in Rome. Saint Sixtus II was celebrating Mass in the catacombs of San Callisto when Roman soldiers suddenly stormed in. The Pope was then decapitated along with 4 of his deacons right in front of his congregation. Pope Saint Pontian died of forced labor in mines after being exiled to Sardinia. He resigned the papacy, the first pope to do so, knowing there was no chance for him to return alive. It's widely rumored that Pope Paul II died of a heart attack in 1471 while being sodomized by a page boy. Legend has it that Pope Adrian IV, the only English pope in history, died after choking on a fly that flew into his mouth while he was drinking wine. On his deathbed in 1492, Innocent VIII's doctors reportedly tried to revive him by transfusing blood from 3 young boys. All 3 children reportedly died from the experiment, and the Pope died shortly afterwards. It's often cited as one of the first recorded and failed blood transfusions. Pope Saint Clement II died suddenly in 1047, just 1 year into his reign. Nearly 1,000 years later, in 1959, a medical exam of his body revealed dangerously high levels of lead, suggesting he was actually poisoned. And last but not least, considered by many to have been the worst pope in history, the reign of Pope John XII involved gambling with church funds, ordaining a child bishop, and allegedly toasting to the devil. It's widely believed that he either died of a stroke while having sex with a married woman or was beaten to death by her husband. The biggest frauds of all time. Elizabeth Holmes founded the company Theranos in 2003, claiming her device could run hundreds of tests from a single drop of blood. At its peak, the company was valued at $9 billion, but it was all an elaborate lie. The technology never worked, test results endangered patients, and Holmes was convicted of fraud in one of the biggest corporate scandals of modern times. In 2023, she was sentenced to 11 years in prison. In the 1990s, Nigerian conman Emmanuel Nwudi scammed a massive Brazilian bank out of $242 million by selling them a Nigerian airport that never existed. Posing as a top banking official, he used forged documents and fake phone calls to convince executives they were funding an incredible deal. The fraud ran for years before auditors finally exposed it. Woody was sentenced to 25 years in prison, but much of the money was never recovered. Tanya Head became president of the World Trade Center Survivors Network after gaining fame for her harrowing survival story. She claimed to have barely escaped the collapse of the South Tower, suffering third-degree burns while crawling through smoke and flames, while watching several colleagues die around her, including her own fiancé, whose body was never recovered. She led tours of Ground Zero for grieving families, gave emotional public speeches, and became an inspiring face of 9/11 remembrance. But in 2007, it was finally exposed that she wasn't even in America on 9/11. Her entire story, right down to the dead fiancé, was all an elaborate lie. Milli Vanilli became global pop stars in the late 80s, winning a Grammy with hits like Girl You Know It's True. But in 1990, it was exposed that the duo had never sung a single note on their own records or during live shows. They were always lip-syncing to tracks recorded by studio singers. Their Grammy was revoked, albums were pulled from stores, and the scandal became one of the most infamous frauds in music history. Belle Gibson built a global wellness brand by claiming she had cured her terminal brain cancer through diet and natural remedies. But in 2015, journalists revealed she never actually had cancer at all and also lied about donating to charity. The scam made her millions but ended in total disgrace. She was fined 400,000 Australian dollars for misleading customers, and her wellness empire completely collapsed. In the early 2000s, Rudy Kurniawan became one of the world's top rare wine sellers, moving millions of dollars worth of supposedly priceless bottles to elite collectors. But behind the scenes, he was running the biggest wine fraud in modern history. Rudy refilled bottles with cheap blends, forged labels, and even used UV light to adjust his fakes so that they'd fool collectors' authentication tools. In 2012, the FBI raided his home and found an entire wine forgery lab, stacks of empty bottles, fake labels, corking machines, and a massive stockpile of cheap wine. In 2014, Rudy was sentenced to 10 years in prison in order to repay all $28.4 million. But to this day, some of his fakes are still sitting undiscovered in the world's finest wine collections. In 1978, San Francisco was left shaken when disgruntled former city supervisor Dan White snuck into City Hall through a basement window and gunned down Mayor George Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk in cold blood. At trial, prosecutors expected an easy murder conviction, but White's lawyers argued that he was deeply depressed, pointing to drastic lifestyle changes, including a diet of sugary junk food like Twinkies, as proof of his unraveling mental state. The bizarre argument, later mocked as the Twinkie defense, convinced jurors to downgrade his charges from murder to voluntary manslaughter. White was sentenced to just over 7 years, but walked free after barely serving 5. The shocking leniency sparked outrage across San Francisco, fueling the violent White Night riots and leaving the city completely haunted by the fact that the man who assassinated both its mayor and his supervisor spent less time in prison than many would serve for petty crimes. These are the most bizarre and disturbing behaviors ever observed in chimpanzees. In 2008, a chimpanzee from Zambia named Julie was spotted with a strange new habit. She would stick a piece of grass in her ear and just leave it there. It served no purpose for food, grooming, or communication. But soon enough, other chimps in her group began copying her, as researchers eventually realized this was the first fashion statement ever observed in the wild. Lucy the chimpanzee was raised from birth to believe she was a human. She learned to sign over 250 words in American Sign Language, but also picked up some rather disturbing human habits. Lucy developed a taste for gin, spent time flipping through Playgirl magazines, and even used a vacuum cleaner to masturbate. When she became too difficult to control, researchers released her into the wild. But years later, her body was found mutilated, most likely killed by poachers. Azalea the chimpanzee lives in a North Korean zoo and has been known to smoke a pack of cigarettes per day. She's learned to use a lighter and can even light one cigarette with the burning end of another. In Uganda, scientists observed young chimpanzees caring for sticks and rocks as if they were children caring for dolls. They cradled them, carried them into nests, and treated them as if they were babies. The eerie implication is that chimps, like humans, may be capable of imagination and symbolic play. In 1997, a chimpanzee named Santino stunned researchers with his violent planning at a Swedish zoo. Each morning while calm, he gathered stones and stacked them in hidden piles around his enclosure. Later in the day, when he became agitated, he used those piles to launch surprise attacks on zoo visitors. It was the first clear evidence that an animal had deliberately prepared for future violence. Best known for playing Martin Corley on Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide, 36-year-old actor Tyler Chase has become the next tragic reminder of Hollywood's child star curse. Fans recently spotted him homeless in Los Angeles and Riverside, sparking a GoFundMe for food and shelter. Concerned strangers began sharing videos of him on TikTok and rallying support to help get him back on his feet.
Hello, my name is Tyler Chase, and I'm here on a Christian movement for acting.
But Tyler's own mother has since urged people not to donate, insisting that the man needs medical treatment, not money, explaining that he can't manage finances or even his medications on his own, and giving him money may only worsen his situation. The ashes you get after cremating a body aren't really ashes at all. During the burn, soft tissues and organs completely vaporize into gas, and any true ash is swept away through the chamber's exhaust. What's left are small bone fragments, which are then ground up in a machine called a Cremulator to create the fine sand-like remains families keep in urns or scatter across Disney World. Despite the Ride of Steel roller coaster's posted rules and safety manual requiring riders to have 2 legs, Iraq War veteran Sergeant James Hackemer, who had lost both legs in combat, was still allowed to board the ride at Six Flags Darien Lake in 2011. Midway through the ride, he was violently ejected from his seat and killed instantly. At the height of his YouTube and FaZe Clan fame, Norden Chat, aka FaZe Rain, spiraled into a drug addiction so destructive that millions of fans watched him unravel in real time. What began with casually showing off painkillers to his audience escalated to him swallowing alarming amounts of pills on stream, bragging about it while his body silently deteriorated. By 2020, Rain was suffering seizures, collapsing, and eventually lost the ability to walk. Doctors warned the nerve damage in his legs might be permanent, leaving him in a wheelchair and forcing him into grueling therapy. His addiction wrecked friendships, destroyed his career, and turned a gaming star into a cautionary tale as fans saw him posting from hospital beds and fighting through constant pain. But after years of setbacks and near-death lows, he finally clawed his way back to sobriety. Rain can now walk again, is slowly attempting to rebuild his career, and now shares his harrowing story as a warning about how fast addiction can take everything. During the War on Terror, U.S. interrogators turned to music as a weapon, blasting songs on endless repeat in secret detention sites. Among the most infamous tracks was Eminem's The Real Slim Shady, which detainees reported being forced to hear non-stop for up to 20 days. Former prisoners described the experience as so unbearable that men would scream, weep, and even bang their heads against the walls for hours just to escape the sound, a form of psychological torment that left no physical scars but shattered minds. In January of 2022, shoppers at a Walmart in Crockett, Texas witnessed a bizarre and disturbing encounter. A woman named Rebecca Lynette Taylor approached a mother with an infant son and casually offered her $250,000 in cash to purchase the child. When the stunned mother refused and tried to leave, Rebecca allegedly followed her into the parking lot, doubling her offer to $500,000 and insisting she'd wanted to purchase the boy for a long time. Terrified, the mother contacted police and Rebecca was arrested and charged with the felony offense of sale or purchase of a child. Here are some lost ancient artifacts that were underwater for centuries until they were uncovered by a drought. After a Chinese reservoir was drained 10 feet in 2017, a 600-year-old Buddha carving was uncovered. Underwater archaeologists even found evidence of an ancient temple beneath the 12-foot statue. This ancient megalithic monument in Spain was revealed by a drought in 2022. The Spanish Stonehenge is up to 7,000 years old, some 2,000 years older than Stonehenge itself, but its true purpose remains unknown. A 500-year-old church emerged from a Mexican reservoir due to a drought that dropped the waterline by 80 feet. This 600-year-old Buddhist monument was uncovered when the water of China's Yangtze River dropped to 45% below its usual height. In 2013, a Virginia man accidentally left his phone recording during a routine colonoscopy, only to later discover chilling audio of the medical staff mocking and humiliating him while he was unconscious. The anesthesiologist was caught calling him names, joking about giving him syphilis, and even plotting to cover up potential mistakes by blaming the patient. Outraged, the man sued, and in 2015, a jury awarded him $500,000 in damages.